Once she arrived at the front door, Gabriella pressed the doorbell. But despite multiple attempts at ringing the bell, no one appeared at the door. The more she stood there, the more Gabriella started to panic. However, Gabriella didn't know that it was not that people didn't hear the doorbell ringing. It was actually Adele who wouldn't let them answer it. Adele was living a rather comfortable life recently. Although Jackson had yet to agree to marry her, there weren't other annoying women appearing by his side anymore. When she had fallen down the stairs on purpose, Jackson chose to believe her. He had chased away the strong but brainless Gabriella after that incident, which had made Adele very happy. However, it had been such a short time, and Gabriella had shown up again. Adele was afraid that Gabriella had come to settle things with her. If they started fighting, she definitely wouldn't be able to win. Adele had thought that Gabriella would understand the situation and leave after no one opened the door for her. However, instead of leaving, she kept ringing the doorbell nonstop. Jackson would be home soon. If he saw Gabriella, her pitiful appearance might make him agree to talk to her. At this thought, Adele suddenly thought of something. She went upstairs and found 2 small bottles she had kept hidden in her luggage for a very long time. One of the bottles contained an aphrodisiac that would make any girl become a promiscuous woman with just a drip into their food or drink. The other bottle was a mist spray and only required the target to breathe a little of it after spraying it into the air. Its effect was about the same as the liquid. She planned to use it on Jackson at first. However, she was afraid that he would despise her for using such a despicable method, and that it would make things worse. So she had kept it hidden and had yet to take it out. Now that this shameless Gabriella had appeared once again, if she made Gabriella lose her innocence, she would probably be so embarrassed that it would make her disappear for good. After it happened, Adele could push the blame onto Gabriella and say that it was Gabriella who had seduced her man. Adele went downstairs, a cold glint flashing in her eyes when she saw Gabriella on the intercom screen. This woman was too much. Who could blame her for doing this? Gabriella was shameless. How dare she continue to pester Jackson when he belonged to Adele now? No one could snatch him away. Adele called one of her personal staff members over and instructed her quietly. The woman was a little afraid. "Miss Adele, if Jackson finds out, he will..." Adele interrupted the woman sternly. "Who do you think will be the woman of this house very soon? Besides, don't you know who is more important to Jackson? You just have to follow my instructions. When I become the woman of the house, I will put you in charge." This was the woman's biggest dream, so she stopped hesitating and nodded. "Okay, I will do as Miss Adele has instructed." It had been a while since Gabriella had begun pressing on the doorbell. Finally, the door was open. The staff member was standing by the door and welcomed Gabriella inside. "Miss Gabriella, why are you here at this hour?" Gabriella had been really exhausted lately because of her younger brother being sick with the new virus, and she just wanted to see Jackson as soon as possible. "Is Jackson here?" "He should be back in about half an hour." "Miss Gabriella, is there a problem?" Gabriella nodded. "How about I call him for you?" "If it's just a half an hour, I can wait for him in the living room." "Of course." The woman made a cup of tea for Gabriella. After thanking her, Gabriella sat on the sofa. Adele observed Gabriella from upstairs. Her eyebrows furrowed when she saw Gabriella sitting on the sofa without drinking from the cup of tea. This woman was actually quite guarded. However, it was fortunate that she had a plan B. Adele handed a bottle to the staff member who was helping her. The woman then took the bottle and walked into the living room. Glancing at Gabriella, who had a hand to her head in deep thought, she sprayed the spray bottle in the air several times. Miss Gabriella, there seems to be a strange smell in here. Let me spray some air freshener to clear it up." Gabriella had rushed over from the fishing village to the capital, so indeed, she had not taken a shower for 2 days. She had her head bowed as she stood up on the sofa, planning to stand in the corner. Suddenly, a soft fragrance wafted into her nose. "Miss Gabriella, it's all right. You can remain sitting." Gabriella looked up at the woman who was smiling at her. Gabriella's vision blurred as she pressed her fingers into her palms with all of her strength. However, no matter how hard she pressed her fingers into her palms, the dizziness seemed to grow stronger. What was happening to her? Gabriella blinked and realized that something was wrong. Her body swayed unstably. "Miss Gabriella, are you all right?" The woman approached her. Gabriella wanted to push her hands away, but she couldn't muster up any energy at all. Gabriella's heart constricted in panic. She had really been so stressed lately. How could she forget that Adele was around? The door hadn't opened, even though she rung the doorbell for so long. Since Jackson wasn't around, Adele might definitely think of a way to deal with her. She had long experienced how despicable Adele could be. But she never expected for Adele to be this awful, though. Gabriella's body shook as the staff member helped her out of the room. Using her last bit of strength, she threw the conch shell necklace she was wearing onto the sofa. The woman helped Gabriella into an empty building behind the main house before she went to find a male staff member that she was friendly with. She handed Gabriella over to the man. "Miss Adele has asked you to treat this woman well tonight." The man stared at the pretty but thin girl in front of him, and his Adam's apple bobbed. "Tell Miss Adele to be rest assured. I won't let her down." The building Gabriella was in was used to store some random items, so it was rare for people to enter it. The man stared at the pretty and slender figure in his arms. Even if he played with her for hours, no one would find out. Gabriella didn't know what the woman had sprayed in the air. She wasn't unconscious, but her consciousness was fuzzy, and she couldn't muster up any strength at all. She knew she was in danger, but she couldn't get out of it. It was a vulnerable feeling she had never experienced before, and it made her feel terrible. She opened her eyes to see a man standing in front of her. The man caressed her scorching face. She opened her mouth, wanting to tell him to scram, but not a sound left her lips. "Don't worry, I'll make it comfortable for you." The man took off his clothes. Gabriella was trembling terribly from head to toe. She wanted to struggle out of the man's hold, but she had no energy at all. The man reached out to caress her cheek once more, and Gabriella used all of her remaining strength to bite his finger. The pain in his finger angered the man. He retracted his hand and stared at his bleeding finger with a distorted expression on his face. Once the pain subsided, he yelled at Gabriella. "You will not escape. If you don't cooperate, I'll ruin you." "Get lost." Gabriella couldn't muster any energy within her as she moved her legs, trying to kick him. However, her kicks were too weak to kick, and the man smirked, placing a small camera on the table beside them. After the woman had brought Gabriella away, Adele went back downstairs. She went to the wine fridge and poured a glass of red wine for herself. After taking a few sips, the woman returned. "How was it? Was it successful?" "I've passed her to Andy. Andy will do as you have requested." "Did you tell Andy to record it?" "Yes." Adele downed the red liquid as a satisfied smile appeared on her lips. "Don't worry. I will treat you and Andy well after the deed is done." "Thank you, Miss Adele." "Why are you thanking her?" Suddenly a low and magnetic voice trailed out from behind them. The woman jumped up in fear and turned back to see the tall man who had suddenly appeared behind them. His handsome face had no expression on it at all, and his dark eyes pierced through the air, staring straight at her and Adele. The woman's reaction made Jackson furrow his eyebrows slightly. Adele glanced at the woman and put down the wine glass before she approached Jackson with a smile. "She has some trouble at home. I've helped her, and she's thanked me for that." "Yes, Miss Adele is the kindest woman I've ever met." Jackson stared at Adele. She had been rather quiet lately. He pulled Adele's hold on him away as he walked towards the sofa and said to the staff member, "Make a cup of tea for me." Jackson then sat on the sofa and pressed a hand against his forehead. Adele walked over to him and stood behind him. "You must have had quite a bit to drink tonight at the meeting. Let me massage your temples." Jackson leaned backward, planning to close his eyes for Adele to massage his temples. However, he suddenly saw a red string on the sofa. Jackson narrowed his eyes. Just as Adele was about to start massaging his temples, he raised his hand and stopped her. "Adele, go and tell the staff to make some dinner, too." "Okay." After Adele left, Jackson picked up the red string. He stared at it for a few seconds, his eyebrows furrowing. If he remembered correctly, the small conch shell hanging on the red string belonged to Gabriella. It was an ordinary item, but she wore the necklace all the time. But why would her necklace be on his sofa? As if thinking of something, Jackson got up and walked towards his office. He turned on his computer and opened the video footage of the house. Seeing that Gabriella had come to the house not too long ago, and then had been let out by the female staff member who had been thanking Adele, Jackson's expression darkened. After instructing the woman to make Jackson's favorite supper, Adele carried the cup of tea to the living room, but Jackson was no longer sitting on the sofa. Adele went upstairs, but didn't find him there either. An ominous feeling suddenly swelled within Adele. Did he notice something? No, she hadn't exposed herself. It would be impossible for him to find out. Even if he had found out by now, Gabriella must have lost her innocence to that man already. "Ah!" A loud scream rang out, followed by some explosive curses. The man cupped his ear and glared at Gabriella, who had almost bitten his ear off. His expression was completely distorted, and his eyes were filled with anger. Earlier, she had said that she was going to tell him a secret about Miss Adele. Gabriella felt weak all over. How could she fight this man off with no energy? Just as tears of fear were about to fall from her eyes, a loud bang burst through the air, and the building's door was kicked open from outside. Andy froze and looked up, seeing a man dressed in black, exuding a dark and elegant aura from his head to toe. He was flabbergasted, and his mouth fell open like a gaping fish. "Sir? Why would Jackson be here? Didn't Miss Adele say that it would be fine?" Seeing Jackson's dark expression, Andy felt a chill flood him. He slowly fell to the ground, shivering all over, not daring to look at Jackson again. Jackson's cold and sharp eyes glanced at the haggard-looking woman on the ground. Her face was unusually flushed. If he had come even 1 second later, the scene would have been unimaginable. Jackson knew in just one glance what had happened. Gabriella had been born with crazy strength, so it would be impossible for her to not be able to handle a simple man like Andy. The only explanation was that she had been drugged. Jackson took off his jacket to wrap it around Gabriella's slender figure before lifting her up. Jackson carried Gabriella out of the building and said to the butler who had followed him, "Haul that man into the house." Hearing this, Andy was so scared that his eyes rolled back and he blacked out. After Adele couldn't find Jackson upstairs, she went back downstairs to ask the other staff members if they saw him. One saw Jackson leave with the butler in tow. The bad feeling in Adele's heart grew even stronger as her hands holding onto the cup of tea trembled slightly. She kept telling herself to not expose herself by panicking. Jackson might have gone out for something else. Even if he found out about Gabriella, she would be fine, as long as his heart was still with her. Just as Adele calmed her nervous heart a little, the sound of steady footsteps approached. Adele hurriedly walked towards the footsteps. Seeing the slender figure Jackson was carrying, Adele's eyes widened. "Jackson, what's going on?" Adele approached Jackson, acting like she knew nothing. Jackson's dark and sharp eyes turned toward Adele. His lips were pursed tightly into a line. Adele was surprised by his murderous gaze. She had never seen such a gaze on him. It was like a sharp blade that was piercing towards her throat. Adele swallowed back her anxiousness, but her pale expression betrayed her. She knew that she couldn't act panicked right now. Her lashes trembled as tears began to fall down her face. "Jackson, why are you looking at me like that? I haven't even asked you who you are carrying." Jackson spoke coldly. "Butler, before I come back downstairs, no one is allowed to step away from the living room." With that said, he carried Gabriella upstairs. Seeing this, Adele wanted to follow after them, but the butler stopped her. "Miss Adele, Jackson has instructed you to stay downstairs." "Outrageous!" Adele glared at the butler angrily. "My room is upstairs. Why can't I go up?" "Because." Adele was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. Jackson carried Gabriella into his room. "Dusty, is it you?" Gabriella opened her eyes and saw the man's well-defined facial features and dark eyes. She didn't know if she was dreaming, but the man in front of her really looked like her Dusty. Dusty. Thinking of her Dusty, Gabriella wrapped her arms around the man's shoulders. Jackson tilted his head a little, and her lips landed on his handsome cheek. Gabriella blinked, 2 drops of tears falling from her eyes. "I know, Dusty won't come back. He's become part of the Johnson family again, and the woman he loves is Adele." "He has no intimate relationship with Adele." Jackson didn't know why he wanted to explain this to her. Seeing Gabriella crying this way caused a tinge of pain that even he was surprised by. There won't be one in the future either. "Dusty, save me. Please, save me." Jackson's jaw was tense as he placed Gabriella into the bathtub. He wanted to get a female staff member to come help her take a bath. However, he had only turned around when he heard a loud bang. Gabriella had climbed out of the bathtub and had fallen and hit her forehead against the floor. "Dusty, don't leave! Don't leave!" Seeing the fear in her eyes, Jackson pursed his lips tightly and returned to Gabriella's side to pick her up once again. Gabriella stared pitifully at his handsome face. "Dusty, are you really going to leave me behind?" Jackson froze for a second. Her calling out Dusty time after time made him feel a little panicked somehow. Had he really liked this girl before he lost his memory? Just as Jackson froze, the girl pressed his lips against his. "Dusty." Her voice and unexpected action pulled Jackson back to reality. He knew he was her Dusty, but because she was an absent girl from his memories, she was merely an unknown girl to him. His morals prevented him from doing anything out of line when she was barely conscious. He carried her back towards the bathtub and put her in the tub. He then turned on the water and sprayed her with the water. "Cold! Dusty, it's cold!" Even though the water sprayed, she could barely open her eyes. "Hold it in." Her long hair was completely drenched by the cold water. Strands stuck to her face and neck as water beads fell from her eyebrows to her well-defined nose, then onto her red lips and her pretty jaw and collarbones. "Dusty!" No matter what she said, Jackson acted like he heard nothing. After nearly an hour in the cold shower, Gabriella became a lot calmer. Thankfully, she hadn't inhaled too much of the drug. Jackson carried her out of the bathroom and had a female staff member dress her. He went downstairs after she had fallen asleep. After the shower, Jackson's black shirt was drenched as well, so he had unbuttoned the top 2 buttons, exposing his exquisite collarbones and chest. Jackson looked even more masculine right now. His masculine hormones were running wild, but he remained calm and serious. Adele had been sitting on the sofa the entire time, feeling uneasy and fearful. When she heard Jackson ask the butler to get a female staff member to go up and change Gabriella, she felt happy. If Jackson was getting someone else to dress Gabriella, that must mean that he hadn't touched her. Maybe he would forgive her and keep her by his side. After Jackson got downstairs, Adele stared at him with affection in her eyes. She spoke softly. "Jackson, why didn't you let me come upstairs?" Jackson walked to the sofa and sat down, his slender legs crossing elegantly. He took out a cigarette, placing it between his lips. After he lit the cigarette, Jackson inhaled and exhaled slowly. His dark eyes became darker and more mysterious from the smoke. "Adele, are you still not going to tell me the truth?" Adele's heart tightened. She looked down and bit her lip, only speaking after a few minutes. "Jackson, what are you talking about?" Gabriella was drugged. Adele widened her eyes slightly, looking shocked. "What? Gabriella was drugged? What happened?" Jackson tapped his cigarette against the ashtray as he glanced toward Andy, who was also in the room with his sharp eyes. "Since Adele doesn't know what happened, you can tell her." Andy eyed Jackson meaningfully. He started to say in trepidation, "Sir, the lady was drugged outside and came to look for you, saying that she wanted you to be her antidote. We didn't let her come in, but she insisted on trespassing. Later, she lost her rationality and saw me as her antidote." Before the man finished speaking, he was interrupted by Jackson's cold voice. "Get him out of my home." Andy was so scared his face turned completely pale. He started to plead with Jackson. "Sir, it was Miss Adele and Wanda who asked me to do this. Please, have mercy on me." Jackson's expression remained cold and indifferent as he said coldly, "Throw Wanda out, too." Hearing this, Wanda was so scared she fell to the floor. When the butler got someone to drag her away, she grabbed onto Adele's leg. "Miss Adele, save me, save me." Adele kicked Wanda away. "How can I save you? Besides, this is Jackson's decision. How can I interfere?" After Andy and Wanda had been dragged away, Adele crouched in front of Jackson, who was exhaling smoke slowly and had a terribly cold and frightening expression on his face. "Jackson, I didn't think that Gabriella was being taken advantage of. If I knew, I definitely would have saved her." Jackson's hand, holding on the cigarette, grabbed Adele's chin as he narrowed his dark eyes. "Would you?" Panic spread in Adele's heart as she instantly grabbed the fruit knife on the table and pressed its sharp blade against her fair neck. "Jackson, I promise on my life that I am not lying to you." The sharp blade had sunk into her neck a little and blood started to flow out. She was using her life to gain his trust. Jackson extinguished the cigarette in the ashtray and grabbed Adele's hand, pushing the fruit knife away. Happiness surged in Adele. Her method had indeed been effective. Just as she was about to pounce into his arms, he suddenly grabbed her arm and said darkly, "You probably don't know this, but I recently got the butler to install cameras in the living room and in your room after you fell down the stairs." Hearing Jackson's words, Adele felt like something had exploded in her ears, and her mind turned completely blank. The man's fingers wrapped around her slender neck like a snake. Slowly, it became more and more difficult for her to breathe. but he didn't use much strength and pushed her away quickly. He stopped touching her, as if she was tainted and he would dirty his hands if he did. Adele fell to the floor as her pretty face paled. Her long lashes fluttered as she stared at the man sitting on the sofa. As he stared down at her with a temperatureless expression, he looked cold and elegant. This was a Jackson she had never seen before. His eyes on her were no longer as soft as they had been. All that was left was a penetrating coldness. At that moment, Adele understood he didn't care for her anymore. His affection had somehow disappeared. Adele couldn't take such a blow. She crawled toward Jackson and grabbed his pants, crying, "Jackson, I was wrong. I did it only because I thought of losing you. You know I don't have my parents anymore. I don't have Grandma, and Jordan changed his mind about me too. I have no one to depend on. I only have you, Jackson." Jackson did not care, and Adele was panicked and terrified. To her, Jackson was like her final straw. She wanted to marry him and become his wife. If she could marry into the Johnson family and be Danny's sister-in-law, her status would be like hers. If she could make Jackson enamored with her, she could instigate the brothers' relationship in the future. She had such a grand scheme planned out. Must it be destroyed before she could make it happen? Adele stared at the man who was standing up with her teary eyes. He slowly walked up to her. It was such a familiar face, but there was an additional coldness about him that felt unknown to her. "Jackson, I love you. I did all of this because I love you so much." He looked down at her with his elegance and coldness as he said, "You never loved me." "No, I did. I really did." "You only love yourself." Jackson narrowed his eyes. Everything he had felt seemed to fade away in a second. Time could not be rewound, and it was clear to him Adele was no longer the innocent and kind girl she used to be. That beautiful girl was gone. This needed to end right now. Their past relationship prevented him from throwing her in prison, though. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were even more cold and dark. "Leave the capital by tomorrow morning. Do not step foot into this country again. There is nothing between us anymore." Adele's heart sank. "Jackson, no! Are you really going to throw me away for that woman?" "If you're not willing to leave, I will have my bodyguards physically remove you." Adele felt like she'd been thrown into a deep abyss. Jackson was the type of man who followed through on his word. If this is what he was saying, it would be impossible to change his mind. Despair bloomed in Adele's heart. She never thought that tonight would be her last night in his home, and her dreams of becoming his wife were completely shattered. Adele sniffled and asked, "Can I go upstairs and pack my things?" In the time she had moved into the house with Jackson, he had given her countless gifts of gems and jewelry. She wanted to take them with her. Jackson saw right through her. If possible, his eyes turned even colder, his expression seemingly frozen without a hint of warmth in it. "The butler has brought your things down for you." The butler walked downstairs and passed Adele her suitcase. Adele opened it. Inside were only a few clothes she had brought with her, as well as her ID and passport. Everything he had given her, including the credit card, was absent. Adele was terrified. She never thought Jackson would be so ruthless to her. She took her suitcase and left, with heavy legs, without even sparing him a glance.